We're going to get started, and I'm going to pass actually the mic to Max Page, who is the president of the Mass Teachers Association. For those who are not familiar with teachers' unions, there are two national unions. There's the National Education Association, which the Mass Teachers Association is a member of, as well as many local unions across Massachusetts. And then there's also the American Federation of Teachers and AFT Massachusetts, and many unions like the Boston Teachers Union, Lawrence and Lowell. Lynn, Chelsea, et cetera, also part of AFT. And we work very closely together because we have a lot in common and we're fighting for the same things. And this National Day of Action, by the way, which had over 900 actions, actually, we believe at this point it's over 1,000. Across the country, and just in Massachusetts, we had more than a couple dozen, if not several dozen. And we have really been appreciative of the partnership between the NEA and AFT, also Moms Rising nationally, the Lines to Reclaim Our Schools here in the AFL-CIO, and here in Massachusetts, also the Mass Education Justice Alliance and Mass AFL-CIO also helped to put this uh, together. So, Max.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Max Page, president of the MTA. We have a new tagline we've just started using, which is "We are a diverse union of education workers." We're 117,000 members across pre-K through public higher ed. And just as you said, Jessica, I'm really glad that we're here with you, with AFT members and MTA members and the broader community. And today we celebrated together this March 4th, me and Deb McCarthy, our VP, and Brant and Jessica all together in Revere. And we who are on the right side of history need to get together at this time in solidarity, comradeship, and this firm commitment to public education. We got to put aside all differences and recognize the crucial work we're doing. So some may know, or I'll tell you, along with being president of the MTA, I'm a professor of architecture at UMass Amherst. And perhaps my favorite building in Boston is the Boston Public Library. And there are two inscriptions on the exterior that I always look at when I walk by there. And they apply to the mission of the library, but also to our public schools. The first one over the front door says "Free to all." The second says, "The Commonwealth requires the education of the people as the safeguard of order and liberty." Those things are crucial statements about what our public schools are. And tonight we are going to hear a lot about, as we should, about the direct attacks, the budget cuts, the undermining of support for diversity, equity, and inclusion, the protection of LGBTQ plus students, the threats to academic freedom. All that is true and needs to be discussed. These things are coming at us probably and being announced in the State of the Union tonight. But I also want to make sure as we start this that we're all looking straight at the facts, which are that the Trump administration seeks to dismantle public education. There is a reason authoritarian regimes start by attacking universities and public schools, because our schools, our colleges are where citizens are born. Free-thinking people who can think for themselves, who challenge received wisdom, learn accurate history, and stand up for themselves and their communities. So this existential attack on public education, I know, is frightening and infuriating. I feel that every day at 4 in the morning when I wake up. But all this means that our fight back, our defense of public education, our resistance to the attacks on the foundation of democracy, which is our public schools and colleges, matters in a way that few battles in our life have mattered or will matter. And what's great about this huge town hall and all the hundreds of thousands of events that happen all across the country, AFT and MTA together, is that we are together in this fight as unionists in alliance with parents and community members, defending our Commonwealth's greatest invention that we bequeath to the rest of the country, which is universal, free public education that allows us all to achieve a greater measure of liberty and prosperity. So thank you for having me here. I'm really so glad that we are together in this fight together. I know it's hard to say I'm happy because there's terrible, terrible things happening, but I am happy about the kind of solidarity that we are building in defense of public education. Thanks. All right, back to you, Jessica.
Thanks so much, Max. And for For those who didn't see in the chat, the interpretation is working now. You just have to click on the three dots more. Well, actually, Gabriela, do you want to explain? Uh, I actually think that Gabriela is in the interpretation room. And so, in order to hear her, you do need.
Um, Jessica, I can make the announcement really quickly.
Okay, thanks, Zuleika.
No problem. So, in order to access interpretation, you want to click at the globe on the bottom
Oh,
of your
sí, pero en
screen.
español.
Okay. All right. Because I think it would have to be turned off, but I could do it in Espanol. Gabriela's in the Espanol channel.
Sí.
So I could do Espanol in the English channel is what you want, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
just in case there's
So,
anyone who didn't get the direction to do it. Yeah.
ok. Para poder acceder la interpretación en español, tendrían que elegir el globo al fondo de la pantalla o los tres puntos que dicen más o more. Y entonces ahí verán y pueden elegir su idioma, inglés o español, si eso es lo que prefieren. Muchas gracias. Y cualquier cosa, nos pueden mandar un mensaje en el chat. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Suleika. All right, this is teamwork in action tonight to solve problems. I did want to just also thank you, Max, for the welcoming introduction. But if we can go back to the slides, I just wanted to share the outline of what we're doing this evening real quick, now that we've got the interpretation settled. We are going to actually begin with a panel just shortly about what's at stake, and we're going to get a breakdown of what does the DOE do? Why should we care? Is it just a bureaucratic structure and building in DC, or what are the myths and truths about the impacts of the DOE and funding, and how is it going to impact our local schools and communities? Then we're going to do a panel on describing in more detail just exactly what those local school and educator impacts can be. And then the last part of our town hall tonight is about fighting back and what actions and next steps we can take. After the second and third panel, we will have a little time for Q&A. So if you do have a question, you can submit the question in the Q&A. And that is also at the bottom of your screen. All right, so we're going to get started with the first panel, and we are going to have Mary Catherine Ricker, who's the executive director of the Albert Shanker Institute, which is a think tank founded by the AFT. And she was previously the commissioner of education in Minnesota during Governor Tim Walz's first term, and was the AFT's executive vice president as well as president of the St. Paul Federation of Teachers. We also have Sarah Wilfred. She is a teacher by training, taught middle and high school math for 10 years, and then served as a data coach with Boston Public Schools, and currently serves as our Director of Education Policy and Programming at AFT Massachusetts. And then we also have Eric Berg, who is a first and second grade teacher for 25 years before being elected to serve as the vice president, and we served together of the BTU, and then also currently the president of the Boston Teachers Union and father of two BPS graduates. So I'm going to kick it to you, Mary Catherine, to give us the federal overview, nationally what's happening and what's at stake.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you everyone who is joining. Over 400 of you are taking time tonight to take a collective deep dive. To Max's point, this is solidarity and action. This is action and solidarity. It's just such an absolute privilege to be invited to spend a few moments with you tonight. I am going to talk to you a little bit about what's happening at the Department of Education, cast some light. We have some additional resources for you to sort of do your own deep dive in your own time, but let me give you that lay of the land of what's happening. As Jessica said at the opening of tonight's webinar, Linda McMahon is now our Secretary of Education. The final vote was taken, and she is officially our Secretary of Education. She has very publicly committed to pursuing President Donald Trump's goal of dismantling the Department of Education. And so while we don't know the details behind that yet, we have begun to see some of the actions they've begun to take to attempt to dismantle the Department of Education. So with that in mind, let's go back to Jessica's question. What is the Department of Education? Is it a building in Washington, D.C.? What does it do? On a great day teaching, which I spent over 13 years as a teacher, you don't really think of the Department of Education, the federal Department of Ed, because it works so seamlessly in your school day. That that additional aid you have in that special education classroom or who joins my English language arts classroom, that may be someone whose position is being funded thanks to the work of the federal Department of Education. The additional resources you have in your school to make sure that if you are a school that is serving a student population living in poverty, so that you can add and have rich sort of rich experiences for those students despite a community with concentrated poverty, that's likely thanks to additional funding that came from the Department of Education and thanks to the guidance as well as the support the Department of Education has given you. So on a great day teaching, you don't necessarily feel the Department of Ed around you, but you sure will miss it if the work of the Department of Education goes away. Now, one of the things we can say is the Department of Education is not the agency that controls what schools teach kids and how you teach it. That is a local and state responsibility. However, I say that because there are actually laws that prevent the federal government from dictating a federal curriculum to our states. And so those are local and state responsibilities. However, President Trump has actually signed executive orders already, even before Linda McMahon was confirmed, aiming to increase federal power and influence on our local schools. So while there is one message saying that President Trump would like to dismantle the Department of Education, he has signed executive orders looking to increase the Department of Education's influence in areas the Department of Education has previously been forbidden to go. Some of his executive orders are trying to prevent our schools from affirming our students' identities. Executive orders that are trying to force a national social studies curriculum that they're calling a patriotic education that would override your own state standards. So while during her confirmation hearing, now Secretary Linda McMahon had said she wants to return the power to the states and return the power to the our local education agencies, there are these signs that they are looking to amass more federal power than ever. So pay attention to both what is happening and what is being said. Now, let's just give you a few facts, because I know, as I mentioned, that on a good day, you may not know that the federal government is helping to support the education you are collectively delivering to students and their families. Here are some examples of how that is happening. And Max, I appreciate you being introduced as a post-secondary educator, because 70% of the federal Department of Education budget is for higher education student aid. 70%. This is funding that supports low-income students who are working to attend higher education. Also, there are funding streams that support our low-income students, like I just mentioned. Often we'll use shorthand in education, and we call it Title I. Now, our parents and our families and our communities may not know what Title I means, but really it is support for students who are living in poverty so that they can have a strong and rich public education experience. There is also funding that supports students with special needs. Now, it has been well documented that the federal government has never fully funded the promise they made to help us support students with special needs, but that funding is currently coming from the federal government to our states, and they're funding at they promised 40%, they're funding at about 10% right now. Nonetheless, we would feel a lot of hurt if that 10% went away. And then the remainder of the federal government's budget is funding for research. Now, attempts to reduce any of this funding will disproportionately impact students living in poverty, students with disabilities, and college students who cannot afford the full price of their tuition. President Trump and Elon Musk have already cut about $1 billion in research. Now, like I said, some of this funding goes to research. So why should we care? Well, some of that research cut was focused on questions that could perhaps explain why reading achievement is so stagnant, why it is low, and importantly, what should be done about it. There are active research studies happening before this cut that looked into best practices for teaching and then figured out how to share those best practices so that we as teachers could improve our practice and better meet the needs of our students. What you need to know is that Congress controls this budget. And so it is Congress that has to address these large budget priorities, and Congress controls whether the Department of Education continues to exist as it has been supporting schools across the country, or whether that will change. Now, so far, with these executive orders, Congress has not been involved. We need to ask questions of Congress to determine what active role they will take in protecting that funding that is impacting students living in poverty, students with disabilities, college students who cannot afford the full price of their tuition. And finally, I want to add there are two other areas that you need to focus on besides the Department of Education. First, there are big questions about the continuation of Medicaid. Now, Medicaid is often found in Health and Human Services, and people wonder why do we need to pay attention to Medicaid? Well, I did a little research for you before joining you tonight, and in Massachusetts, you have a school-based Medicaid program. And what that means is that some of this school-based Medicaid program means that you may have a school nurse, a social worker, or someone else who can actually bill Medicaid for support they give to students like audiology, medical nutritional services, mental or behavior health services, skilled nursing care, occupational therapy, physical and behavioral health screenings, or speech therapy. Some of these things are being funded by school-based Medicaid in Massachusetts and actually in states across the country. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is the discussion that's happening around the Department of Agriculture, because the Department of Agriculture is the home to our school nutrition programs. And right now, we know that breakfast and lunch are an integral part of our school days. And so in addition to this information about the Department of Education, please keep your eye on and your ears open for those conversations around the support for Medicaid, as well as the Department of Agriculture, particularly where it pertains to our school nutrition programs. Jessica, back to you.
Thanks so much, Mary Catherine. And again, if you missed the introduction, you can put questions in the Q&A, and then after this panel, we will take a few of those questions. So please do look for the Q&A. And if you just joined too, we do have the interpretation working, and you just have to click on the three buttons and then pick interpretation, pick your language. And then we ask that you pick English too, so that if we do have a Spanish speaker, then you'll get the English interpretation. Okay. Thank you again, Mary Catherine, and we'll definitely be coming back to you during the Q&A. Sarah Wilfred, again, our Director of Policy, is up next.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm so excited to be here with you. So my name is Sarah Wilfred. I'm the Director of Policy at AFT Massachusetts, and I'm here to speak a little bit about the loss of federal funding and the impact that it will have on the state of Massachusetts specifically. You can go to the next slide, Emma. Thank you. So just to give you a little background, AFT Massachusetts and MTA, or Mass Teachers Association, represent more than 135,000 public school employees, higher education faculty and staff, and public librarians. And our members and our members' schools rely on several streams of federal funding to support the academic, physical, and social well-being of our students. The two largest federal funding streams for our pre-K to 12 schools include Title I funding. Mary Catherine mentioned that. Thank you so much for that great overview, Mary Catherine. And the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. You'll hear me reference both of these during my talk with you. Of note, and Mary Catherine mentioned this, Title I funds are particularly important for districts with high numbers of low-income families to ensure access to high-quality education for all. You can go to the next slide. Thank you, Emma. So in Massachusetts, let's take a look at the specific numbers. Approximately a little over $297 million would be lost in Title I funds, and a little over $368 million, almost $364 million would be lost in IDEA funds. And I encourage you to take a look at some of the sources. We've pulled a lot of our data from the Ed Law Center. In the state, not yet, in the state of Massachusetts, I want to say that, 190,000 students have been enrolled with students with disabilities, and there are 385,000 low-income students. AFT Mass serves 26 districts, and MTA serves over 300. It's important to know that salaries and different programs are funded through Title I and IDEA funding. We're going to take a deep dive into one of our districts, Lynn. So in Lynn, there are a little over 2,000 members, 2,174, and the salary impact would be the following. $4.6 million of the district's $7.7 million in Title I allotment is salary. And more than $4 million of the $5.1 million IDEA allotment is salary, 80%. 61 teaching positions are funded by Title I, and 95 educators are funded by IDEA. You can move on. I appreciate Boston's example because it really does identify the specific programs that Title I supports. The almost $43 million in Title I supports programs that help English language learners, parents, provides extended learning time, after school and summer school, whole school improvement processes, and professional development. A final note, a little over $18 million in IDEA funds support students with disabilities. Eric, who is the next presenter, will be able to share a little bit more about some of the different contractual and staffing things in Boston as well. To conclude, I would just encourage you to take a look up and check out your district. If you click on the QR code, that will take you straight to the DESE website, and you'll be able to identify the Title I allotment that's been given to your district to help advocate for your funds and advocate for the salaries and the positions that are needed to support our most marginalized students. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And we will now go to Eric to hear a little bit more about how this impacts our educators directly as well. And if you missed the QR code for looking up your district, we're going to put that in the chat as well.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Sarah and Mary Catherine, for sort of setting the table for looking at one example, which is the District of Boston, the biggest public school district in Massachusetts. But also thinking about how it affects all of us in whatever context we work in or go to school in or send our kids to school in, because we all work in school systems that receive federal funding. We've heard this evening about Title I, about IDEA, about Medicaid, about some USDA funding, but there's also Title II for professional development, McKinney-Vento funding for students experiencing homelessness, Perkins funding for vocational education, career and technical education. And it's important to remember that every federal dollar that a school district is denied from the Trump administration is a dollar that's not available to meet the needs of our students. So that in our context, as union educators, the context of collective bargaining, the needs of our students and the needs of the teachers, the paraprofessionals, librarians, counselors, social workers, occupational therapists, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, and others that we represent will be harder to meet. So, for instance, there will be fewer resources available for adequate staffing in our special education classrooms. That paraprofessional who is assisting with 3 and 4-year-olds to make sure their needs are met might not be there. For curricular materials for our multilingual learners, a big proportion of Title I funds in Boston go for supports for kids who have recently arrived and need support learning English while maintaining their language, their native language. We will have less access to school lunches for kids whose families may not have food at home. And we know how hard it is and how unfair it is to ask kids to learn when they're hungry. And we will have, as unionists, a harder time securing reasonable wages for hardworking paraprofessionals who make up the backbone of so many of our schools and who are often woefully underpaid. And then we know that as positions are cut, which they inevitably will be, the remaining educators will need to fill in those gaps without support, making an already unsustainable job even more challenging. I know what it meant for my students in my 25 years teaching in first grade and second grade when the resource room teacher was not able to be there or the speech therapist was unavailable. The way students feel that absence and the way their learning suffers will be magnified if federal funding is cut and these positions are unavailable. Our work as unions will be harder if the U.S. Department of Education is dismantled and federal funding is cut. Contracts will be more difficult to negotiate, and it will be harder to protect the rights of workers and advocate for the rights of our students. And that is why it is critical, and I'm so looking forward to the third panel tonight. It is critical that we come together now and fight back against this ill-advised and harmful project, which is to really destroy public education. But I also know that the fact that there are almost 500 people on this call tonight with very little notice means that there is will in our communities to fight back and to push back and to make sure that the systematic undermining of public education doesn't happen, because we know that when we're united and when we fight together, we do win. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Eric. And we definitely are getting questions in the chat, and I just wanted to share a few of them. Mary Catherine actually answered some of them already, but I think they're important to highlight. So one question was from Melissa, and she said, her son has a 504 for type 1 diabetes. What is going to happen, and how will affect him and his assistance with this. Mary Catherine, do you want to say a little bit more about what's happening and how it's being challenged?
Yes. So first, it's a really important question. Thank you for asking it. I think there were a couple of 504 questions. Right now, the constitutionality of the way we have been administering 504 is being challenged. And so we really do need to pay attention to what is happening in that suit. So right now, I will say 504 support should go forward as traditionally it has. Until this suit is sorted out, there is no change. And so we do need to watch to see what happens with this lawsuit. And this is definitely a place where you can reach out to your attorney general and ask if they have joined the lawsuit. I apologize, I don't know if Massachusetts has. But this could be an area for the third panel, to Eric's point, where you start talking about your values in action, where there may be some students and families and educators who can help out in this regard and help tell their stories.
Thanks. We also have a couple questions on federal funding affecting adult education, and also cuts to funding around Medicare, which you had mentioned. And maybe you could speak to that. And Eric and Sarah, feel free to weigh in. There's another theme that I'm seeing that I'll ask in a second.
I'll jump in on the Medicare one. Because I think I did answer someone specifically because I don't know your school's budgets. I do not know specifically what your school or your district may be able to bill because of because of the sort of resources. And that's why I think it's important that we pay attention to any cuts that are being discussed around Medicaid. Because obviously they could impact us. Again, right now, my advice would be to go forward with what you have been doing. If you are one of the people who has been assigned the responsibility of helping to bill for Medicaid, first of all, thank you very much. That's such an important work in our districts. And two, I think you go forward until we hear differently.
Great. There is a question about whether this is being recorded. It is, and we will be posting it so that if you do have colleagues who missed this, they'll be able to view it again. Another question, though, is about the impacts of Health and Human Services. Would other departments essentially be able to administer IDEA, or can they be consolidated? There are a couple of questions about that as well. Does anyone want to?
I will just say right now that is anybody's guess. Given the sort of the dueling conversations we are hearing, the dueling executive orders, on the one hand saying we want to dismantle the Department of Education, but on the other hand, sort of supersizing the power of the federal government in our education. Those things don't make sense. So saying we want to shrink government, then at the same time assuming they will move a program whole cloth into another program, and recreate the bureaucracy that's been serving our states and our districts just in another cabinet office. It truly is one of those things where I would be guessing if I gave you an answer right now. And so the most important thing again is getting to that third conversation you are going to have tonight, which is what do you do about it? What do you do to say, don't disrupt the work we are doing to better meet the needs of our students with special needs? Because that's what it will be. It will be a disruption. Anything will be a disruption. Right now, what we are doing is trying to best meet the needs of our students with the support we have, the guidance we get from the Department of Education. Do not disrupt that. And if you do anything, fund us like you promised you were going to fund us. So I offer that rather than I don't want to make stuff up. I think we have to listen, and I think our voices and our stories have to get out there first so they see the damage they could do if they do start disrupting the work we're trying to do on behalf of students and their families.
Great. Thank you. Oh, Eric, are you going to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add, I absolutely echo what Mary Catherine said, but I think we need to prepare as if these programs will be unfunded and dismantled, and we need to push back against it so that they won't be, because anybody who thinks they can predict what's coming, we don't know. We've already seen what's happened in the last 6 weeks. So that's why it's so important that we get together and we unite right now to stand up and as Mary Catherine said, share our stories, because we know how important this is for real kids and real communities.
Yeah, and I'm just going to go ahead and echo, I think, both Eric and Mary Catherine in terms of really standing up. I just want to, I think, reiterate and elevate, I think, the QR code that I had on my in sort of my slide deck. I know we're sharing and sort of recording the webinar, but just to take the opportunity just to really, I think, take a look at as I think Mary Catherine mentioned this, your school's budget. Take a look at the Title I district allotment. Take a look and try to understand, really the impact of this on a district level, on a day-to-day level, on a school level, right? On students, on teachers, on staff, on the community. And really use, I think, our collective voice, our collective energy is really what brings and gains momentum. And it's in that we can really, I think, power change.
So we have to wrap up this panel, but we're going to try to answer questions in the Q&A continuously throughout the night as well. But I am going to ask one question that we had several people ask, which is the impact on adult education. Does anyone want to tackle that one?
I will just say I have heard less about adult education being spoken of, but I will certainly look into that. And just you asking the question will help me keep my ears a little more keenly listening to discussions about both funding streams as well as guidance and continued support for adult education. So I just want to thank you for raising that. And it has not been part of the public discussion so far, but I will keep my eye on it. Thanks to everyone here tonight.
So again, continue to put your questions in the Q&A, and we will try to answer them as we go along. And I'm just going to mention one last thing before we go to the next panel, which is that we are also concerned that one of the things that the federal government might do is to try to turn funding into block grants. And the reason that is really dangerous and problematic is because then the funds that are supposed to be going to low-income students or English language or multilingual learners or our students with disabilities, etc., won't necessarily, the money will not necessarily go there because there will be no accountability for that. And instead, what we've seen they can be used for actually is more charter schools and more vouchers. And we know that the voucher experiment in many of our states has actually grown inequities between our different groups, and then the funding is actually diverted from the students who need the most resources. So that is why that's uh, uh, problematic. But we will continue to answer questions in the QA, but we need to move on to the next panel. I did see something quickly out of the corner of my eye about VOTEC and CTE, and yes, there are federal grants for CTE and VOTEC that can and could be cut as well. All right, so moving to our next panel, though, we are going to hear directly from Suleika Soto, who helped us a little bit with our interpretation earlier. She is a Boston Public School graduate and an immigrant and a BPS parent dedicated to education justice, and co-chairs the citywide parent council and works as a parent organizer with the Boston Education Justice Alliance, MEJA. We have Dania De La Cruz and Brian Ramos, who are Lynn Public School students. And then we also have Leon Smith, who is the executive director of Citizens for Juvenile Justice since 2019 and has been advocating for young people impacted by local and state systems. And then the last but not least, Darren Howell, who is the organizing director of the Mass AFL-CIO. And Darren has been involved in the labor movement for over 20 years, and many of you in the labor movement will know Darren and his leadership, in particular on racial, economic, and social justice campaigns. So we're going to bring up that panel now and hear first from Suleika.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica, for that introduction, and thank you very much to the previous panel and to all of everyone that is joining us today. I am here tonight not just as a parent, but as someone who refuses to stand by while our children's futures are put on the chopping block. And let me be clear, the proposed cuts to federal education funding are an attack on public education, like Jessica mentioned. And Massachusetts students and their families will be among the hardest hit. This isn't just about budgets. This is about the reality that families like mine and so many others are already living. We wake up every day trying to give our kids the best shot at success. We juggle work, school drop offs, after school care, homework, and everything in between. We do it because we know that education is the key to their future. But what happens when supports that families rely on start disappearing? Families already struggle, and now they want to take more away. We've been fighting for more bilingual support, more special education services, more school counselors. And instead of getting what our kids need, we are now being told to prepare for less. And what does this mean for families? It means parents of multilingual learners who already struggle to navigate a school system that doesn't always speak their language will have even fewer bilingual educators to support their children. It means families will have to fight harder to make sure their kids don't fall behind. And not because they are not capable, but because the resources to help them succeed are going to disappear. And it means parents of students with disabilities who already spend hours emailing, calling, and attending meetings just to get their child's IEPs followed will have to fight even harder. It means fewer special education educators, fewer aides, fewer therapists, more wait lists for us, more delays, more students pushed into classrooms that aren't designed for them. And it means parents who rely on their child's school for mental health support will have nowhere to turn. Right now, there are families who send their kids to school every single day, knowing that their child will have access to counselor, to a trusted adult who listens. If these cuts go through, those supports will disappear, leaving families to figure it out on their own. It means more kids will go hungry. For many families, the guarantee for a free breakfast and lunch at school means one less thing to worry about. And parents already struggle to keep up with the rising cost of rent, food, and childcare. Now they might have to figure out how to cover one more meal a day, 5 days a week for each of their children. And all of this is happening at a time when families are already stretched thin. And these are not hypotheticals, these are the real life consequences of these cuts. Title I funding doesn't just support academics, it ensures that families have a voice in decision making, access to translation services, and the ability to advocate for their children. When Title I is cut, families lose parent engagement programs that help families navigate the school system, interpretation and translation services that allow non English speaking parents to communicate with their child's school, workshops and trainings that teach parents about their rights, including special education and language access, school based family liaisons who help parents stay connected to their child's school, and advisory councils and decision making bodies that ensure parents have a seat at the table. When these supports disappear, families are pushed further to the margins. Parents who already struggle to engage with schools will have even fewer opportunities to do so, and decisions about our children will be made without us in the room. We shouldn't have to accept this, and we shouldn't have to accept less when we've been fighting for more. Parents shouldn't have to worry if their child's school will have enough teachers next year. We shouldn't have to fight just to make sure our children gets the education they deserve, and we shouldn't have to choose between paying the bills and making sure our child has food at home and at school. But that is exactly what these cuts will force us to do, and we have a choice. We either stand up or we stand by. So I ask everyone here, every parent, every caregiver, and every community member, will we let them take away the resources our children need? Will we allow them to force students to do even more with even less? Or will we fight back and demand public education remains a right and not a privilege? Because I believe in the power of parents, I believe in the power of our educators, and I believe in the power of communities coming together and saying enough is enough. Because when we fight for our kids, we win, and we must win because our children deserve nothing less. And thank you all so much for being here and choosing to fight with us.
Thank you, Suleika. We have our students who are next.
Hi, my name's Brian Ramos. I'm a high school graduate. I went to KIPP Academy Lynn Collegiate and I went to Lynn English High School. I just wanted to speak about how the bill to pass the KIPP Academy Lynn expansion was rejected, and how I wanted to deeply express my concern that we were rejected the ability to talk and be able to voice our concerns about why this is extremely concerning, on how they would take away $8 million from public funding of public schools. I think with the uncertainty of public education right now, that is an extremely risky attack on our public schools and the kids and the people who are currently taking the education inside of Lynn English High School and all the other high schools in Lynn. I was extremely upset that they denied us our time to speak, because I felt like these decisions that would take away so much of our ability to have a basic education, they shouldn't be decided just on the people who are in power. I feel like us as students need to have voices. I'm an incoming college student. I've been graduated for a year, and I'm just extremely worried for my future and my education, because I feel like there's an attack on my own personal education right now. And I feel like it's extremely unfair that we aren't even allowed to have a voice in what we say and what we think about the things that directly affect us. And we showed up that day and we held up signs and we tried to voice what we thought was right. And I believe that we truly made a difference. And I think that goes for every time that we show up and want to make a change for people. And I just think that we need us as students and us as youth need to be included with everything in the future because we are the future of tomorrow, and we truly do decide everything for the future because we are who come next, and then we pass it on to the kids of the future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And we also value student voice, which is why we wanted to make sure that we had two students as a part of our town hall tonight. And for those who don't know the background very briefly, there were 7 applications to expand charter seats. And while we do proudly represent charter school teachers and educators and have charter schools in our unions, it would have been extremely harmful to our students in Lynn and their education if that funding had been lost, particularly, as Brian said, in these precarious times. And the students went to the board meeting, actually, and unfortunately were not given the opportunity to speak. And they were very courageous and trying to speak up anyway. And Danya was one of those leaders.
Yeah, it was kind of and I'm gonna be open about this. It was kind of embarrassing and sort of disheartening having to voice our opinion so loud and basically yell in front of a bunch of politicians just to have our voices heard, which they weren't. But I think that just by our being there, we made our presence seen. And I think that's an important discussion that we have to have when we're discussing um, funding changes and policy reform around education. Um, because without student voices in the education system for Massachusetts, we can't actually make positive change that will help our students in our classrooms. Um, in Lynn, we're making a movement. We show up to student council meetings every 2 weeks and we make our presence heard. We want to increase funding for extracurriculars, but how difficult will that be if we don't have funding at all and we don't have money to sustain our classrooms? I think that the work that we're doing here and the conversations that we're having are so important, but what's more important is that you listen to us and that you take into consideration what we need and what students can help you with in this movement. So I think that as we take into consideration everything that we're learning and we have these conversations, we start to make movements around student empowerment all around Massachusetts and start groups of student advocacy so that you can make a difference with us and not just for us.
Thank you, Donya, 100%. And I want you to know that there is nothing to be embarrassed about. What you all did was courageous, and we actually need more courageous actions like that. And that is why we were doing our March 4th events, is that we are actually trying to exercise our own activist muscles because it's hard sometimes to interrupt, the kind of professional meetings or, these situations that need interruption, but it's not always easy to do. And so thank you both for showing courage and showing us what we all need to do, which is to speak up when something's not right, to make sure that your voice is heard, to tell your stories, and to show up at the school committee meetings, the city council meetings. All of us need to be doing that and joining you. So thank you both for being here tonight too, and leading and showing us what we need to do. All right, we are next going to go to Leon and Darren.
Yeah,
And we're
so
gonna
for
have both of you
starter,
kind of speak together because we're a little short on time. And so we're gonna kind of combine the two. Yep.
okay, I'll jump in. And for starters, thank you so much to the young people. You're absolutely right. We need to work in lockstep alongside of you all and not just for you. I appreciate your words. So as someone representing an organization focused on state policy, I start with this. We cannot assume that because we are in blue Massachusetts that everything is good and that we don't need to stand and fight for our students' future in the face of the outright political violence being imposed by this administration. An honest look at the educational landscape here in Massachusetts reveals that beyond the reputation of being number one, our students of color, immigrant students, and low-income students already received disproportionately poor outcomes relative to their peers prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the pandemic only deepened those pre-existing inequities. Despite being a leader in education, we're dealing with pandemic learning losses and a widening of our educational opportunity gap. I say opportunity and not achievement gap because the issue is not and has never been our children's ability to achieve. It is that far too often our vulnerable students, including those with disabilities, walk into dilapidated school buildings and into settings that lack the supports and services that they need. And they are far too often punished and excluded from school in a disproportionate manner relative to their peers, realities that combine to provide them with fewer opportunities to work through their challenges, strive, and meet their potential. Addressing those issues requires support, a commitment to equity, and funding from all levels of our government, which is something we should demand. But instead of that support, those in this current federal administration have been moving with intent to dehumanize our children, especially those who are LGBTQ, of color, and from immigrant backgrounds, threatening to implement policies that will leave them behind and hamper their future. There are those in this aspiring oligarchy that want opportunity to exist only for those who come from means or who reflect their limited, bigoted, narrow version of who is deserving. They fully understand that education is a pathway to not just financial stability, but to breaking the bonds of multi-generational poverty and reaching opportunities that allow young people to better their situation and that of future generations that come behind them. And they are threatening to upend that. They understand that teaching real history that uplifts the contributions of those from all cultures inspires our children, especially those from diverse backgrounds, to reach for the stars, and they want to stop that. Especially personal to me is the need to fight for DEI initiatives, which are still legal despite recent Supreme Court cases. These initiatives ensure that those working in education reflect the communities that our children come from, and they ensure that children with gifts and abilities have the fair opportunity to maximize them, opportunities they deserve. Despite the shameful smear campaign, that is what DEI is all about. It's not didn't earn it. It's you know damn well that my work and talent meet the standards. So open the door and give me the opportunity that I've earned. As a Black public school kid from one of the poorest communities in America, I am living proof that when kids like me get those opportunities in a fair playing field, we shine. This administration wants to dismantle those pipelines and pathways, ones that changed my life, and I take it personally and am ready to fight to keep those opportunities for future generations, and I hope you will as well. By threatening to dismantle the Department of Education, they are putting at risk key dollars that are desperately needed by districts to provide support for students who need more. By placing shackles or outright undermining the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, they are closing off a pathway where parents facing discrimination could file complaints that could lead to a district being held accountable to change their practices to ensure fairness. By stripping away guidance and dear colleague letters that uplift practices that ensure equity, they are taking away documents that I and many other advocates have used to hold districts accountable. Federal funding being diverted away will lead to larger class sizes and less one-on-one support, making life more difficult for students in need and the teachers that dedicate their lives to supporting them. In short, these actions impact us and our students, and that is why it's critical for us to step up, hold our elected officials accountable, and all of us to fight to ensure that opportunities for our young people are not dismantled and destroyed. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon, for your very, very powerful words. And I definitely see people in the chat saying that they're willing to stay on longer to hear every word from our speakers, which I appreciate. And what it tells me is that we need to have another one of these soon so that we can continue to hear from our incredible activists and organizers, which we will. So last but not least, in this panel, Darren Howell from the AFL-CIO. Dare, we gotta unmute you 1 second. There we go.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, for and others for hosting this tonight. Everyone for being on involved. Want to start off by saying I am not an expert, but I have been privileged to be in a bunch of spaces to really get informed with this information that I've been tasked with sharing. I know that we're pressed on time, so I'm going to do this a little fast, given my own experience in doing some of these trainings as well. So I'm going to just read some of the top line things in regards to how school students and teachers can be supportive to immigrant workers and families during this time, what unions are doing and can be doing during this time, and then give everybody a heads up to an upcoming virtual webinar where we'll go over these things in detail. So first things first is making sure that everyone knows their rights. So schools play a vital role in protecting immigrant students and families from fear, discrimination, and exploitation. These are some of the ways that it can be done. First, creating a safe and supportive school, establishing schools as safe zones, advocate for school policies that prohibit ICE from entering school grounds without a warrant, ensuring staff know their rights and how to respond if enforcement actions target students or parents. Two, provide know your right resources, educating students and families, distribute multilingual know your right guides for students and parents. Please provide that to all of the students. Do not target out any students when passing out information because we do not want them to feel like they're targeted or put on window display. Also, hosting workshops for families, making sure that you're providing any helpful information that can be beneficial to those families, being the ones to convene that conversation. Three, support teachers and school staff, making sure that they understand the advocacy for immigrants, educators. Teachers unions should bargain for protections against unfair terminations due to immigration status. They should advocate for legal support for immigrant educators facing visa or documentation challenges. Also should make sure that you train teachers to support immigrant students, making sure that the teachers can recognize signs of fear and trauma related to immigration and enforcement, making sure providing professional development on supporting undocumented and mixed status students. Four, mobilize rapid response and legal support. We need to connect students and families with legal aid and making sure that they are prepared with an emergency plan for families. Five, organize school and student-led advocacy. We just heard about students stepping it up and making sure that their voices is heard. Let's make sure that we're guiding them and providing them the necessary support so that their voices can be amplified. And we also need to push for local and state protections. Now I'm going to switch it real quick to what unions are doing right now, which is educating and empowering workers. We're hosting these trainings, distributing know your rights materials, making sure that people understand the ways that the work sites are targeted with ICE raids. So using I-9 documents and making sure people understand how those documents are used, unfortunately, in a negative way at this time. They're not targeting the criminals, they're targeting the workers. Train workplace leaders, making sure that they're shop stewards that understand the rights and the information so that they can inform their immigrant co-workers about what they need to know and preparing emergency plans. Two, we need to strengthen contract protection. So if there's any bargaining that's going on, making sure that we're negotiating just cause protections, including legal assistance and the CBAs as well. And we want to make sure that we're limiting employer cooperation with ICE. We do not want the employer providing them additional assistance. Three, mobilize rapid response and legal support. We need to create workplace defense teams, making sure that everybody knows their roles in case ICE is present at that shop. Four, advocate for policy changes and public solidarity. We need to engage employers and elected officials. We need to push for pro-worker immigration policies, and we need to organize worker-led actions. And five, we need to build stronger coalitions. We cannot do this in a bubble. We need everyone to be involved and engaged when it comes to solidarity efforts to make sure that we're pushing backs. This was my quick run through because, again, I know that we're at time. And please, on March 20th, we will be hosting a more fleshed out training webinar. Please scan the QR code and I will be there too. And I can actually slow down so that I can share some more information. Hopefully that was helpful in the window of time, Jessica.
Thank you, Darren. And I know that was quick, but that was really just kind of a preview of what we've been doing and working with other organizations, including other labor organizations, to do to keep our schools safe and welcoming for all. And that includes not just immigrant students, but also students of color and LGBTQ students. And so that was another topic that we wanted to address tonight. And we know that there's a lot of fear for particularly our transgendered students, but all LGBTQ plus students as well. And so we are going to put a link in the chat to not just resources for LGBTQ students, but there is an extensive list of resources. And Emma, if you could put that in the chat now, you'll see a link to all those resources. But just last night, I am on the LGBTQ Commission in Massachusetts, and please know that there are many people who are working to ensure that our schools continue to be safe and welcoming for all. And there was a question also about what the governor is doing. Max, Deb, myself, and Brant, our secretary treasurer, actually met with the governor and lieutenant governor today, and specifically talked about how we're going to protect our students. And they have been very strong in coming out recently, the governor, on reaffirming our commitment to our values, and that includes a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and continuing to make sure that our students' rights are supported. Okay, so we are getting close to our original end time. We did start a little late because of our interpretation challenges. However, it's really important that we get to this last panel, which is what do we do? We need to start with knowledge and education about what's at stake. And then there are many steps that we can take to fight back. The students have shared some of them already, and it's come up with Leon and others as well. But I'm going to turn now to Deb McCarthy, who's the Vice President of the Mass Teachers Association, and Vatsidi Savangsai, who is I'm so sorry, I think I said your last name wrong, and I've known you forever. I apologize. Executive Director of the Mass Education Justice Alliance, to share what we can do about this all.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you everyone here tonight. This has been an incredible opportunity. The newly confirmed Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, told staffers on Monday that the department must embark on a momentous final mission as it undergoes a historic overhaul. She warned that the overhauling of the department will profoundly impact staff, budgets, and agency operations. Well, in less than 24 hours, we are using our voices tonight to make it clear that we will not be compliant and we will not sit idly as Miss McMahon and her evil counterparts try to dismantle from us the foundation of a free and just democracy, an educated citizenry. We will wrestle the power away from those who seek to privatize public education for profit's sake. And the tools necessary can be found in Tim Schneider's book on tyranny. Now, it doesn't show up. Okay, 20 lessons from the 20th century. This is a very accessible and short read that everybody on this call should read immediately. And I want to highlight tonight the first two lessons cited in this book. Actions that we need to start to take tomorrow as we fight to save the soul of our country, a free and public education for all. Number one, do not obey in advance. Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like this, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want, and then they offer themselves without being asked. A citizen who adapts in this way is teaching power what it can do. Well, those of us in this call tonight must be prepared to teach power what it cannot do when it tries to dismantle public education. And we must use this collective power to not obey in advance. The second lesson in the book, defend institutions. It is institutions that help preserve our decency. They do not protect themselves, however. We tend to assume that institutions will automatically maintain themselves against even the most direct attacks. Instead, they fall one after another unless each is defended from the beginning. So choose an institution that you care about, says Schneider, a court, a newspaper, a law, a labor union, and take its side. There is no institution more foundational to democracy than the institution that educates its public pre-K through 16. And we must not obey in advance as those in power try to dismantle. I want to end by acknowledging that tonight's webinar is just the beginning of the resistance, the march forward to fight for our public schools, and an indication to all who are listening that we will not obey in advance, and we will defend the institution of public education with the intensity, passion, and the fight back that this moment demands of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb, for those powerful words, and definitely also agree on tyranny has some great advice. We are in the late stages of an autocratic takeover, and I know that sounds kind of extreme, but if you look at the research, it's the reality. And the only way that we can fight this is by massive non-compliance and not doing some anticipatory compliance is what it's called, but in fact, in fighting back collectively. And that's what we have to do. Vatsity is going to give us very concrete actions to share too.
Thank you. Thanks, Deb, for that powerful pick-me-upper and Jessica for pointing out that where we're at today, at this particular moment, is an authoritarian regime of mostly, you know, men who are trying to take the power of the people, right? And when that happens, we lose our basic needs and our ability to fight back. And taking away education and the people's path to be part of a community and to build a community is not a new approach, and it's not a new strategy. We've seen it in the history of the United States, and we've seen it in the history of other countries. So there are some key things that we all can do as educators and also as students, as parents, as caregivers, as community members to preserve and to protect our public education and to fight in solidarity with our union folks across all sectors and community members across all sectors. And to highlight, I'll first highlight what educators can do, and then I'll move into some specific actions for everyone. For educators, we hope that you can take action by hosting a call so that all of your members can collectively make calls to legislators together. Hold teach-ins to continue to share what's at stake for public education, share more information, plan informational pickets before and after school, show that solidarity, bring in our parents, bring in our students, and share how to call legislators. Hold additional walk-ins so that you can prepare to walk out. And invite legislators to meet with your local union and community members so that together you can talk about and further plan how you could work together to protect our kids in public education. And there will be some more links to the AFT toolkit and the NEA toolkit here in our chat. Now, for those who want to take additional actions, there are a list of things that you can do. Some things you could just do with the touch of your phone. Others, might take a little bit of typing through your phone, through your laptop or your computer. But here's what you can do, what everyone can do. Write to your congressperson that there should be no cuts to education. Don't take us back. don't destroy our democracy, and don't destroy the progress that we all have been working towards. Call your federal legislator. This link here, the 5cause.org, is super easy. You just, again, it's just a click away to amplify your voice. And please, please share this out with your friends and relatives. Send it over WhatsApp, send it over Signal, send it over a text message and email. Any quick moment that you have to share information is critical. Attend town hall meetings such as this. Attend them, ask your legislators to be part of it, and ask them to give the updates on what they're doing to fight back. Hold them accountable. We voted them in, you voted them in, you helped get them into office, and they're accountable to our communities. Set up coalition meetings with community partners, particularly in solidarity among all types of community members, parents, educators, students, climate activists, you know, um, civil rights attorneys. Everybody has a place in this fight because it's the only way we're going to stop this and move forward together is when we're all doing it together and fighting together. This weekend, if you're in the greater Boston area, please join the Family to Family Conference. We'll put it in the chat here, the link to the Family to Family Conference. And then join your local Education Justice Alliance. You can contact us here at MEJA, the Massachusetts Education Justice Alliance. And you can email us to learn more at info@massedjustice.org. As I started, there's so much that you can do. Some are just a click and a text away, and then others require a few more minutes. But all of this really is going to help us to ensure that the foundation of our democracy continues to be strengthened and to grow with us and with our students so that we can build a better future for everyone. So I hope that you take these slides, the screenshots that you have, the links that you have, and share it out. So we'll be back in touch to share more and to be part of this work with you. So send it back over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Vatsidi, and thank you all for being here tonight and for hanging in there. I know we went over time a little, but I do hope you found this town hall to be valuable. I think bottom line, we know that knowledge is power and knowledge is a public good, and it is also critical to democracy. So we were here tonight to make sure everyone knows what's at stake for our students and for our schools and to protect public education. But we also know that this fight is beyond also public education. This fight is and has to be in coalition with all the other sectors that are being impacted, whether it's housing, whether it's our immigrant community, whether it's healthcare, whether it's Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, even our national weather system, if you missed that in the last 24 hours, is under attack. Our national parks are getting gutted as well. The federal employees are critical to the services that we've been taking for granted in the United States, and they are all a part of an attempt to erode democracy. And so we have to join in with others. We have to join in community, families, students, the federal workers. I did see the AFGE comment, and absolutely, we are creating actually a Massachusetts Fight Back table so that we can coordinate cross-sector and build the coalition that we need to fight back against all of the harm that's happening to our communities, and particularly the most vulnerable members of our communities, and not just to fight back about what's being harmful, but also to fight for what working families need and deserve. And so thank you again for joining us tonight. Please do stay in touch. This is, like Deb said, this is not the end. This is the beginning. And we need to continue to grow our collective response because it has to be us. It won't be anybody else. Thank you.